Although violence has always been used to spread fear among people in the pursuance of political or ideological goals, it was not until the French Revolution that the term terror became a household expression in the realm of politics. It initially referred to the use of violence by the revolutionary French government to keep in line the population of France in the aftermath of the revolution. The use of violence to instill fear in the public for political goals was subsequently a common strategy applied by different extremist groups, such as the anarchists in 19th century Europe and America, extremist Zionist groups in the late 1940s, nationalists in 20th century Ireland, Palestine, and Spain, radically anti-Israeli groups, and by religious fundamentalists in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Different authors roughly agree on a concept of terrorism which entails the use, or the threat thereof, of force against civilian or unarmed targets with political purposes. The term terrorism is often used in reference to acts as well as organizations and strategies. Under international law, there is no clear-cut definition of terrorism. Since the 1970s, there has been a tendency to criminalize certain actions in specific international treaties, 12 of them of international scope and others of regional scope. These treaties have certain common features. They list acts of terrorism instead of setting forth an abstract definition thereof. They establish the duty to criminalize such acts under domestic legislations. They also set forth the duty to prevent, prosecute, and punish acts of terrorism. They have special clauses for money laundering and financing of terrorism. The parties undertake the duty to cooperate in international and transborder prosecution. Terrorism is denied the nature of political crime, so there can always be extradition for such acts. Alleged terrorists cannot invoke political asylum or refuge, and some treaties include the exercise of universal jurisdiction to prosecute acts of terrorism. Now, the closest to a legal definition of terrorism in international law is that set forth in the UN 1999 International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism. This treaty understands a terrorist act to be an act intended to cause death or serious bodily injury to a civilian or to any other person not taking an active part in the hostilities in a situation of armed conflict, when the purpose of such act, by its nature or context, is to intimidate a population or to compel a government or an international organization to do or to abstain from doing any act. The UN is currently working on a more specific treaty on the definition of the concept of terrorism. Some authors disagree on whether the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 in the United States constitute a landmark that changed the way terrorism was understood until the end of the 20th century. However, it would be safe to state that we do live in a post-9/11 world. Security measures taken by governments all over the world have clearly affected people's ordinary lives in places like airports, bus stations, schools, the internet, and even in the privacy of their homes. For good or bad, the first decade of the 21st century can be labeled as the decade of the war on terror. The first attack on a grand scale on United States continental soil in nearly 2 centuries led the US government to reply by military means, first deploying troops in Afghanistan in 2001 and then invading Iraq in 2003. This military approach found its climax when US Special Forces eliminated Osama bin Laden at his Pakistan refuge in 2011. Some legal authors think that the criminal approach taken by the United States in the prosecution of terrorist suspects amounts to a doctrine named criminal law of the enemy, as opposed to a criminal law of the citizen. The latter treats a criminal as a citizen who committed a transgression and can be reformed. Instead, criminal law of the enemy sees in the criminal, particularly the terrorist, an enemy of the state, who must be contained and neutralized indefinitely if necessary, due to his refusal to play by society's rules. This neutralization has taken place all over the world, in secret places known as black sites, and in the infamous US military base of Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Since 9/11, no major terrorist attack has taken place within the US, barring the 2013 Boston attack. However, its allies, Spain and Great Britain, have suffered such attacks in 2004 and 2005 respectively. This calls into question the high price the international community has paid for an imperfect peace after a decade of war on terror. Not only the attacks have continued, but also in its zeal to make progress in this kind of war, the US has arguably violated moral and legal standards referred to the right to resort to war or jus ad bellum, the laws of armed conflict, jus in bello or international humanitarian law, and human rights law, particularly criminal law. Please visit mookchile.com and don't forget to watch our next class.